Welcome to Walk About the Galaxy, the unstoppable astronomy podcast, where the science is universal, the opinions are personal, and the trivia is xenopathological. That's a thing.
It is. All right.
We are Strange, Charm, and Top the Astro Quarks, also known as Josh Cole, Addie Dove, and Jim Cooney, coming to you from lockdown in Corona Land. Today, we are delighted to welcome back to the show Dr. Mohamed Noor, Professor of Biology and Dean of Natural Sciences at Duke University, and most impressively and most importantly, a science consultant to the Star Trek universe, the coolest title ever. Mohamed, welcome back to Walk About the Galaxy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me back.
As you may know, Mohamed, we start each episode with stumpers, which are meaningless and pointless questions, just so people are pre-warned early on about the meaningless and pointless nature of the rest of the show. And your book, Mohamed, Live Long and Evolve, What Star Trek Can Teach Us About Evolution, Genetics, and Life on Other Worlds, which is a great read, uses all the imaginative life forms in Star Trek to help us understand evolution and possible alien life, is now out on paperback. And so in honor of you being on the show and the new edition of the book, the stumpers for this episode are exobiological. Unlike the trivia, remember, is xenopathological, but the stumpers are exobiological. So Jim, we'll start with you.
All right. I'm ready.
Andorian or Mandalorian?
So I feel like you're pitting, you're pitting Star Trek against Star Wars, and because we have Mohamed on the program, I'm going to definitely go with.
I do love The Mandalorian.
So. Yeah, it was a great show, and I even though I like Star Trek generally better than Star Wars, I'm not sure I like the what is it, Andorian?
The Andorians.
Those people with antennae.
Those are the like blue guys with the little they and so I guess they originally showed up on the original Star Trek, and they look kind of campy, kind of
paint and some prosthetic antenna on their foreheads.
I guess they tried to bring them back. They were mentioned a few times in the other series, and they brought them back in Enterprise, I guess, which I didn't watch the entirety of. But they look campy enough to me that I'm going Mandalorian.
You're going Mandalorian. Okay, all right, fair enough. Addie, I tried to do a similar thing here for you.
Yeah.
Midichlorians or Orions. Or I should, if I'm pronouncing it properly, I would say midichlorians or Orions.
Yeah.
But I'm tempted to say midichlorians or Orions or midichlorians.
Oh, but midichlorians is spelled with an A and S.
Is
and
it?
Orions is spelled, yeah. So, although today I did learn that midichlorians is spelled with a D and not a T, yeah, which is confusing to me.
Really? Why?
Because it's derived from mitochondria, right? Which is with a T. And so, and also just like it's in the middle of something. Like, what is that? What does that mean?
They're from the south of France. They're from the south of France, the Midi.
Oh, okay.
For the Force.
Yeah, exactly. The Force is in the middle of all of us. And anyway, I'm gonna pick not those.
Okay.
So I'm going to pick the Orions, however.
Do you know who the Orions are?
I do, thanks to internet, because the internet told me. But I assume that you're referring to the species that's in the cage, and then other times throughout the show.
Right. Green body paint instead of blue body paint for the Orions.
Yeah.
They have some like strong pheromone thing. I think I remember.
Ah. Okay.
Yeah, they're irresistible.
Did Kirk sleep with at least one of them?
That's
what I expect.
You could ask that about almost any species.
Right. If they had blue or green skin, then definitely he did that.
Yeah, actually, I don't think he did.
Pike. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And we saw them again in the Enterprise, the prequel series. And I think in the Mirror Universe episode of that series, we learned that the Orion, so-called the Orion slave girls, are actually the masters. And that the men are subject to do their bidding. Okay.
Wasn't there one in Discovery too? I think there was one in the end of the first season.
Okay, there could well be. Mohamed, so your choice then is Denobulan or Denebian?
it's a tough one because I love Phlox, who's a Denobulan in Enterprise, but I think I have to go with the Denebian slime devil.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. I thought you were going to go for Denobulan, but yeah.
I was tempted.
Yeah. Why?
Just, I love the name, the Denebian slime devil.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll
Phlox is awesome, though.
He is, yeah.
Definitely.
And that
John Billingsley is just a great guy, too.
Yeah.
He is. I met him once ages ago at a convention, and he just instantly struck me as the kind of guy you'd like to invite over for dinner and just hang out. He and his wife were both there, and that was in the early enough days of Star Trek conventions where it wasn't so commercialized that you had to get your ticket to pay for a picture or anything like that. And so I snapped a picture of, I think actually his wife took a picture of him with me and my daughter, who was maybe 10 or 12 at the time. 10 years later, she was a theater student at Occidental College in LA, and he came and gave some sort of presentation or something like that. And she was able to take that snapshot up to him and say, I met you 10 years ago with my dad at the Star Trek convention in Denver.
And he definitely remembered, right?
And he's like, oh, sure, yeah. He seemed like he was a very nice guy. Well, we'll talk more about space aliens and biology and Star Trek. One of the reasons for the Star Trek themes, we mentioned that, Mohamed, you're a science consultant to the Star Trek universe, and we're recently on the Star Trek cruise. So I'm like, if I'm not dying from coronavirus, it's from envy right now. So we definitely want to hear all about that. And we've got space news as usual. But first, this episode of Walk About the Galaxy is brought to you by Decontamination Gel. If you've just beamed back from an alien world or traveled in a shuttle pod or shuttlecraft with questionable sanitary conditions, then grab a can of decontamination gel on your way into the decon chamber to get rid of those pesky alien microbes. Yes, you've inhaled them already, but your skin will come out squeaky clean following a nice decon gel rub down and UV light bath. Warning, extended use of decontamination gel may result in Vulcan earwax, Denobulan grin disorder, Klingon forehead syndrome, Q, Borg queen dreams, and premature series cancellation. Decontamination gel, good to the last drop.
And sparkly.
Maxwell House.
Good. Decon gel, of course, from Enterprise.
Very cringy scenes sometimes.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Very cringy scenes sometimes.
Exactly. It was so cringe-worthy. And probably even more so for you because of I'm assuming not the greatest idea for how to decontaminate.
Probably not, for exactly the reasons you mentioned.
It's just their version of antibacterial, right?
It's
you think they could just find a way to spray it on you if it has to be external like that? Like have a quick shower done?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
To the gel and rubbing it on.
Yeah,
and you have to
Purell.
You had to get it a little bit under the underwear, but not entirely for some reason.
Clothing, underwear protects you, but the rest of your clothing doesn't. So.
Yeah, right.
Just wear underwear everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Let's see. Mohamed, your book is out in paperback. I have to plug one other piece of book news, which is that the second and final edition of The Ringed Planet, Cassini's Voyage of Discovery at Saturn, written by yours truly, is available for free download the month of April 2020 when we're recording this. So if you find yourself with some spare time, as many of us are, check it out. This month, at least, it is worth every penny. You can get it at the Institute of Physics website, and our link is on our website and Facebook. So before we get into hearing more about space and alien biology, we have a little bit of space news to catch up on. And Mohamed, are you as a Trek advisor from the life sciences side of things, do you keep abreast of what's going on in NASA and space exploration?
I'm interested in it, but I don't have any insight into it. So I'm interested. Like when I see a news story about it, I'll click on it.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've been talking about, Addie, is the SpaceX Starship and their series of tests. And did you notice that there was the serial number 3 also had a pressure failure?
I didn't. I've been I haven't been paying attention to things the last day or two. Oh no.
Yeah, so they've had now each of their three first Starship models. These are these giant stainless steel spaceships that one day in principle may colonize Mars, but they haven't been able to get them to successfully pass their cryogenic pressure tests for their cryogenic fluids. So there was another failure of that, according to Elon Musk tweet overnight. It had something maybe to do with a bad valve or something like that.
What does cryogenic pressure test mean?
That means I think they're just filling it with their liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen. I don't know if they're using liquid hydrogen or not, but liquid oxygen.
Yeah, so they use pressure tanks. They have to have pressure tanks in order to hold all of that. And I guess, yeah, I haven't actually seen too many details of like what, I mean, they don't know exactly what the failures are, obviously, or they would have fixed them. But yeah, I didn't see that. I saw a few, Jim Bridenstine has made a few announcements over the last day about Artemis stuff, and they've just released a new thing about the plans for a moon base past 2024.
Right.
And they announced that the SpaceX launch vehicle that's going to have the next Crew Dragon is going to have the NASA worm logo on it, which if you're into logos, that's exciting because they sort of had phased out the worm. The worm is like the NASA, that it's the NASA, but like just all curvy letters. That's the NASA worm. Versus
so that
the
was
Beagle,
introduced,
which is the blue with the swoosh.
Yeah, the worm was introduced in maybe the early 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Late 70s, early 80s.
It's a very like
sort of
80s looking logo.
And it was sort of in the doldrums of human spaceflight for NASA, sort of post Apollo, but not yet into the shuttle era. And there was a lot of cheering when they went back to the so-called meatball, the original logo. Is like, that's when NASA was great. But now it's been long enough that the logo is the worm logo is sort of nostalgic, and for some reason everybody's happy about that. I don't know.
Yeah.
So what are the plans for Artemis post 2024?
I don't know.
So it's permanent outpost in the South Polar region and the sort of Shackleton Crater region on the moon. So that's going to be the main base of operations. That's where everybody's focusing their attention because of potential to find water frozen in the surface, underneath the surface.
And I mean, a lot of these plans that they've just outlined are sort of have been in the talking points for a while. I think that they're just sort of like, they've released new graphics, and I think some of these graphics are ones we've actually seen at conferences for the last about month or two.
Mm-hmm.
But they have these new graphics with the swoosh that show like the progress, and they always try to emphasize now that it's a gateway to Mars. So how this technology and testing is going to inform our next journey to Mars.
Right.
And 2024 is the start date for building that? Is that?
Yeah. So that's when we're going to have landing with humans.
Yeah.
Notionally,
when was the last time the U.S. went to the moon? Was it like 1970s?
72.
72.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Way back.
With humans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apollo.
Yeah, that's the last time anyone went.
Right. Yeah.
Anyone's been beyond low Earth orbit.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
So the 2024 is the target date for the first crewed landing of the Artemis program on the moon. That's already a very ambitious schedule, and that was a pre-COVID-19 schedule. Pre $2.2 trillion stimulus check. So it's unclear what will happen with that timeline. A lot of uncertainty in the world right now, but we're here to escape into outer space a little bit.
But speaking of astronauts going to space, they've actually just added this last week. They added two additional astronauts to the first flight to the SpaceX Demo 2 first flight. So it had two astronauts who have been training with SpaceX for a while, but there's been rumors that they're actually going to make it. So it's supposed to be just a quick demo mission. Like they'd go up, maybe stay for a day and come back to the ISS, stay at the ISS for a day and come back. But because of the delays and all of the other things, they're actually talking about keeping them there for a while, which they still haven't announced.
So that plan is to send 4 people up now on Crew Dragon.
So now it's going to be 4 people, including a JAXA astronaut, Noguchi Soichi. I'm probably not saying that right, but he's
from the Japanese Space Agency.
From the Japanese Space Agency, and he's a veteran astronaut. He's flown a bunch before. I mean, all of the folks they're sending up are veterans.
And have they announced a launch date?
They're still saying May,
but not a precise date yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really
That'll
soon.
be, yeah, that'll be
So they
exciting to see.
added Shannon Walker as the U.S. astronaut they added, and she's flown a number of times before too.
Cool.
I'll be further away from COVID-19.
I know,
Yeah.
right? Speaking of astronauts, I did just finish my astronaut application. So
Good luck, Eddie.
Wow.
So let's all just go get away from COVID-19.
Did you ever apply to the astronaut corps, Mohammed?
Oh, no.
Yeah. I think I did. I know I did. I shouldn't say I think I did. I know I did. As soon as I graduated, as soon as I got my PhD, I sent in, was in the days you actually sent paper in. And I did it one time, and you can guess the outcome of that application. and then I had a daughter, and I realized that being an astronaut meant living in Houston. And no offense to people living in Houston, but I had a nice job and everything in Boulder, Colorado. And astronauts spend most of their time not being astronauts. And so that was my rationalization for my failure and decision not to pursue.
I mean, I would argue that they're always astronauts. It's just they don't spend most of their time in space.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But they don't spend a lot of time just training all the time, I guess. I guess there's only so much training you have to do.
They spend a lot of time, I mean, before they fly, there's a lot of training. There's years and years of training, but the rest of the time, there's a lot of sort of just operations that they do, doing ground crew, stuff like that.
Okay. That's cool.
Well, good luck. Fingers crossed for you.
Thanks.
There. So let's see. The other item I have, well, we'll come back to the speed of light thing after, since we were talking about getting far away from coronavirus for astronauts. I've got some very ignorant biology questions for you, Mohammed. So
sure, they're not ignorant. I know nothing about space, so I actually appreciate your expertise on that side.
Well, one of the sort of when astrobiologists and in our field sometimes are talking about origin of life, and there's this general idea of panspermia, that perhaps biological material can be transported through interplanetary or interstellar space and delivered by impact. And on a more simple level, comets are believed to have brought organics and water to the early Earth, is perhaps an important part. But what about the survival of actual living organisms in space for long periods of times and then being viable on some other planet? And as a part of that, is a virus alive?
Oh, gosh.
Ooh.
In fact, I swear I might have asked Mohammed that very same question last time he was on. I don't remember, but I want to know.
Yeah, I mean, the second one, I know there's a lot of varying opinions on it. And I'll say I have no special expertise in viruses. I'm very much not a virologist. I work on fruit flies. But on the virus part, I say yes. I mean, people keep saying, well, but they need other things to live. Like, well, everything needs something else to live. I mean, you can't have no other life and propagate and survive. So I call it a yes, in the sense that, like, it in some ways dictates what's happening in the next generation. So, producing something like itself. So in that regard, I would say yes, but I understand the objections to that.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of debate about that going around right now, just because obviously viruses are all anybody's talking about. But so what are the, just for like those of us who don't study this, what are the sort of basic things that we do sort of use to qualify if something's alive or not? And why don't viruses typically get counted?
Yeah, the problem that viruses have is they basically they essentially don't reproduce by themselves. So, I mean, generally speaking, there's a whole suite of categories in the sense of having some sort of metabolism, being able to reproduce, evolving by natural selection. But there's a suite of things that the exact list tends to vary, because you can almost always find some exceptions to them. So for example, reproducing, you could say, well, so are mules not alive? They can't reproduce. I mean, but nobody says mules are not alive, right? But with viruses in particular, they actually need to reproduce through another species, right? In the sense that they like, for example, let's say you're working with a bacteriophage virus. So it will actually attach itself to a bacteria. It'll inject its RNA into there, take over its machinery, and then the bacterial cell is what actually makes the other viruses, right? So that does sound like a little bit different from, for example, we reproduce without using another species to reproduce. We obviously eat other species and things like that and get oxygen from them, but we don't use another species to reproduce. But there are ones that kind of come close. So I mean, just as an example, there's birds that will invade others' nests and leave their eggs in it. So it's not exactly, the fertilization is happening and the creation of the offspring is happening without another species, but the care that happens to that is often happening by other species. So again, they're alive.
Right.
Those are called
Right.
brood parasites. So
Is the cuckoo?
Yep, the cuckoo is one that does that.
Does
Yeah.
that?
And I don't think
Oh.
it's obligatory. I'm not positive. I'm not an ornithologist either. I think they can take care of the offspring, but they often do just leave their eggs elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think. I'm not positive about that they can, but I think so.
Right. Right.
Interesting.
So if a virus from Earth was on the surface of, say, a Mars rover, and that goes to Mars, and then maybe there are some organisms, maybe some single-celled organisms on Mars, is that something that we should be worried about in terms of
That,
contaminating life on Mars?
So that's a good question. Actually, you mentioned your book on Cassini, and I'm sure that one of the things that comes up in there is the whole reason why Cassini was sent to go burn up in Saturn's atmosphere was to make sure we don't contaminate Enceladus or some other place like that, right? I mean, the biggest concern for spaceships is spores more so than viruses. So spores are they're very resilient. They can take a lot of things. So these could be fungal spores or other kinds of spores too, but they're very resilient. And could they live through space? Not indefinitely, and there's certain conditions where they could do it. But let's say something was shielded inside the surface of a rover that then later got crushed for some other reason. Maybe one way this could happen accidentally, if you think back, so 65 million years ago, we had the asteroid impact on Earth, killed off the dinosaurs, but that probably shot off a ton of rocks and stuff from Earth up into space. And we know there's Martian meteorites here on Earth. There's no reason why there can't be Earth meteorites someplace else, for example, on Mars or things like that. So if, let's say, for example, there were some spores that were like shielded, inside, bunches of pieces of rock, it's possible some could make it there. I mean, obviously the survival rate would be very, very, very low, but think about the sheer numbers of spores. If you're talking about like there's billions of spores in there,
Right.
You only need a couple.
Right. Right.
Now the key is, of course, that it actually gets to a place where it actually can reproduce. So, if it lands on Jupiter, well, I don't even know if lands on Jupiter is a thing that can happen.
Right.
But
Yeah.
there's nothing there that can reproduce. I mean, what you need is some sort of conditions that then would be amenable to it. And again, I'm glad you drew a very good distinction. I really appreciate it, between survival and thriving, right? I think that there are things that can survive in space-like conditions, and people always refer to tardigrade as an example. I'll come back to that in just a second. Yes, it can like not have 100% mortality in a short period of time, but that doesn't mean that it's like reproducing and it's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So the tardigrade one's an interesting one. I actually went back and looked up the original papers on that, and yes, their survival rate is not zero, but it is very low, even with not very long exposures.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah, it
In
wasn't
radiation
like they were
or
I think it was a combination of the radiation and lack of atmospheres in terms of
Vacuum,
cold.
yeah.
It was all of those things all together. It wasn't zero, but it was pretty close to zero. And it wasn't like they did it for 3.5 years or something. They just did it for a very short period of time. And a few
Right.
of them were able to then come back and were actually okay enough in the terms of they were able to reproduce after that.
So you're an evolutionary biologist, and so that's kind of the thing we hear always about, like overusing or misusing antibiotics, is that you kill 99% of them. The ones that are left over are resistant, then they breed, and
Exactly.
so maybe the tardigrades that survived, even though it's a tiny fraction, they're evolving into those giant 6-foot tardigrades that are on Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah, there's other problems there.
I was
Another big
both
one.
thrilled by that when I first saw that. I was like, yes, giant tardigrades, and also like, oh, okay.
Yeah. They didn't consider the whole square cube law in terms of physics for keeping, like, you can't just make it bigger and it's okay. Like,
So in Star Trek Discovery, for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with it, there's an alien thing that looks just like a tardigrade, but it's sort of hippo-sized or something like that. So why doesn't that work? Just elaborate a little bit on that. Why is that?
So if you make something, essentially, like the surface area to volume ratio is changing as you're making something much bigger. It would have to be ridiculously strong to even hold its own weight up. If you took something that started that small and just made it gigantic, like it would have to be made of like lead or something like that to be able to hold its own weight up.
Collapse
that
under
would
its own weight, right?
Yeah. There's an
Yeah.
interesting facet that they brought up in Star Trek Discovery. I mentioned this actually briefly in my book as well, that there was a comment made in passing saying, like its microscopic cousins on Earth, the tardigrade acquires a lot of its DNA through horizontal gene transfer. And I thought, wow, that's very insider. But it's interesting, that particular statement that they made was based on a study that got a lot of publicity. This was around 2015 or 2016, so just very shortly before Star Trek Discovery came out, about the first sequencing of a tardigrade genome, and they found a lot of foreign DNA in it. And that's really cool, except it was retracted the next year, or basically shown to be wrong the next year, and prior to Discovery coming out.
Oh, wow.
Oh no.
Well, that since you mentioned Gene, that I'm going to ask my next ignorant question, and then we'll get a preview for our trivia, and I think Jim and Addie may have some other questions as well. But this is, I don't understand what a gene is or how a gene is identified, because there's 20,000 genes in human DNA or something like that.
Yeah, probably depends on how you define gene. So actually the definition of gene is actually not straightforward, but go ahead.
Okay, well but all those things they don't live on, it's not 20,000 separate molecules, right? It's this long string that are sort of end to end to end. How do you know here's the end of one gene and here's the beginning of the next when you're doing this stuff, which I know
that's a great
about,
question.
obviously.
So there's a lot of different ways people do that. So there's computational predictions and there's empirical ways of doing it. So one way of defining a gene, this is not, of course, the only way. One way of defining a gene is basically a stretch of DNA that is associated with producing, say, a particular RNA, which produces a particular protein, right? And that's obviously, there are things besides that. So that you can actually identify fairly well by essentially isolating the RNA from a cell. And then sequencing that, you'd have to do some reactions to that I'm skipping, but you can sequence that and you can look and see, okay, here's the start of the RNA, here's the end of the RNA, and there's ways of seeing that and then mapping that back onto the sequenced genome. So
Okay.
that's kind of one way of doing it, but there's a lot of, I mean, that is only like one kind of quote unquote gene, and there's a lot of complications that I'm not even going into in terms of, like, you know, different RNAs sometimes will come together, things are cut out. It gets very, very convoluted. I mean,
you're saying genetic biology is more complicated than you can explain in 20 seconds? I can't believe it.
Yes. But I mean, the term gene came out long before we knew that DNA was a hereditary material. People were talking about genes around the turn of the 20th century. You know,
Okay.
and we didn't know till it was 1944 for sure that DNA was the hereditary material.
Is it supposed to be that that one gene codes for one protein? Was that the early idea?
That's a very traditional view, but yeah, again, the truth is much more complicated than that.
Okay.
But to a first approximation, that's not far off. I mean, to a very crude first approximation. But what ends up happening is, if you have a stretch of DNA, it can make a particular kind of protein, but sometimes, like, pieces can get cut out. So you can have these things referred to, the technical term is alternative splicing. So it makes an RNA, but all that RNA isn't necessarily used to make the protein. So sometimes, like, just this piece and this piece will make it. Sometimes from that same stretch, this piece and the middle piece will do it. So there's a lot of genes where, like, there's a lot of individual genes that can make a much broader diversity of proteins than just one, just as one example of the complexity.
And sometimes we hear about, like, junk DNA or something like that, like DNA. And is that truly junk, or is it we just are ignorant?
That's a great question. And that's, again, subject of some debate. I mean, there are areas of the genome which obviously are not associated with making proteins. That's been long known. And I think that's uncontroversial. There's low levels of RNA production sometimes from some of those, but the question is just the fact that it's there. Is there some advantage to it? Is it, for example, by allowing more space between genes, maybe you're allowing them to become dissociated more easily through the process of genetic recombination?
Oh,
maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to know, and there's a lot of things outside of the part of DNA that actually makes the proteins. There's areas outside that actually dictate how much of that RNA is being made, which then is associated with how much of the protein is being made. That's obviously very functional. You wouldn't call that junk for sure. Okay. So again, the levels of complexity just keep going higher and higher all the time.
Sure. Well, I'm going to give you some really challenging questions now. I'm going to tell you our trivia.
Yes.
And so you can ponder them, but you can't Google them, but you can ponder them. And we'll come back for your answers at the end of the show. But the trivia, Mohammed, again, is in your honor. Star Trek, what did I call it? Xenopathological or something ridiculous like that. I'm going to give you a list of diseases or conditions, medical diseases or conditions, which are either from Star Trek or my imagination.
Oh, I have to tell which one's which.
And you have to decide which one is which, and then bonus points for the real ones if you can figure out which series or movie and what was going on with that particular condition. So I've got a ridiculously long
I
list
feel
here.
like he's going to do better than we do on this one.
I have 10 conditions here. Some of them
Right.
some of them
That's
are
too many.
gimmies. Okay.
So on Star Trek, it's interesting. There's so many things that are referred to as neurological diseases. They seem to be really into neurological diseases. I'm not sure why there's so many of those in there.
Maybe it was just like easier to sort of portray those for the actors and the scenes.
Maybe.
I was mainly looking for ones with fun names. So, and I threw some gimmies in here for you.
That's how I pick wines. So.
Okay. All right, here we go. I'm going to run through these and we'll come back at the end. And then I'd love to hear about the Star Trek cruise and what you're doing with the Star Trek universe and all that stuff and your book. So here are 10 diseases from Star Trek or the twisted mind of strange astroquark. Number 1, dysphoria syndrome. Number 2, Barclay's protomorphosis syndrome. Number 3, Riker's chair hopping syndrome. Number 4, Gorch. Number 5, Zimmerman's holographic hallucinatory disease. Number 6, Orion fever. Talked about Orions earlier. Number 7, morphogenic virus. Number 8, Klingon augment virus. Number 9, plaque tau. And number 10, Jadzeian spots.
So they're either fully fictional or they're Star Trek.
Yes.
That's right. Excellent. So tell us what it means to be a science consultant to the Star Trek universe, and also what was your experience like on the Star Trek cruise? First, very happy that you were able to do that before cruises became a non-thing.
Yeah, that timing for that was really good. If it had been 2 weeks later, I don't think it would have happened.
When was it?
It was March 1st through 8th.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, it was very close. And when we got on, coronavirus was definitely growing. There was a lot of concern of people like that. They were giving out hand sanitizer like it was water.
Yeah.
Every time there was a guy who used to stand outside the buffet restaurant just going washy and spray as they go by.
Oh wow.
So who all was on the cruise with you, and what did you do there? Where did you go?
Sure. So let's see. So I'll start with destinations because that's the easiest. We went to Punta Cana in Dominican Republic. We went to San Juan, Puerto Rico. We went to St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands, and Freeport, Bahamas. Those were the stops. And we started from Miami and ended in Miami as well.
Okay.
In terms of the people who were on it, in terms of the science people, it was just me and Dr. Erin McDonald. So Dr. Erin McDonald is the actual official science consultant for the Star Trek universe. She's actually on retainer from them. I just do some sort of like contract consulting. So I'm kind of second tier, but still, I really love it. In terms of the movies or the TV stars who are on it, William Shatner was on, though I actually, this is going to sound kind of funny, I never saw him. I think his panels were opposite things I was doing all the time. So and he's not somebody who would just be like hanging out at the Quarks bar area or something like that. So
was there a Quarks bar area?
There was a Quarks bar area, yes.
Nice.
Mary Chieffo, who plays L'Rell in Discovery, actually went there and was like mixing drinks for people in full costume as L'Rell.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Was Morn there?
Morn was not. Kate Mulgrew was there. Jerry Ryan was there. It was mostly Voyager people. So Bob Picardo, Garrett Wang, Tim Russ.
Bob Picardo is a very nice guy too. I by chance met him, and I had a brief period where I had a fantasy that we were going to become best friends, because it's, again, my daughter was touring her college and his daughter was touring the college the same day, and we were just like a group of 10 parents and their kids going around Occidental College in LA. And he was super friendly, very nice guy.
He was great. So he's recently married, and his wife was there, and his daughter was there too. So that was great. Roxanne Dawson was there, also her husband too. Trying to think. Oh, so Next Generation people: Gates McFadden, Marina Sirtis, Brent Spiner, and then a visitor from Deep Space Nine. There wasn't a lot of Deep Space Nine people.
Any salacious behind-the-scenes stories you want to share with our listeners?
I didn't see anything. Yeah, no, I didn't really see anything too silly. Oh, actually, there was one.
Ooh.
This one was public enough. I don't feel too bad about it.
Okay.
It had to do with John Delancey.
Oh, always up to trouble.
Yeah,
well, he was
originally
in Next Generation, and then in some of the other shows as well.
Yeah. Garrett Wong did stand-up routines, and he mentioned something about John Delancey in both of his routines, and he got permission ahead of time from John Delancey about this. But apparently, John Delancey was wearing kind of tight pants and standing in a certain way, and
on the cruise.
Apparently, at some point, I'm guessing. I'm not sure exactly where the setting was for this, but both Garrett and multiple other actors noticed that he is very well endowed. Apparently, this became a big topic of discussion, both among them first, and then in Garrett's stand-up routine.
Oh, and John Delancey was okay with that being discussed publicly.
Apparently.
Wow,
I'm shocked. Well, if you're a Q, you can make anything possible,
exactly.
right?
For those of our listeners who aren't familiar with Q, he's the sort of omnipotent being, essentially. So stands to reason, I guess. Yeah.
That was probably the most salacious thing I could think of. But it was great though. The actors did a lot of. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot there were Discovery people too. Anson Mount was there, and Ethan Peck, Mary Chieffo, Ken Mitchell. There's probably more too. This is just off the top of my. Jeffrey Combs, I missed earlier when we were talking about Deep Space Nine folks and stuff like that. Anthony Montgomery, or not Anthony Montgomery. What's the name of the person that plays Admiral Forrest in Enterprise?
I don't know.
I forget.
I do know Jeffrey Combs is famous for having played like 7 different species.
That's
I was going
right.
to bring him up earlier when we were talking about Andorians or Andorians and Wayoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Jeffrey Combs. He's great.
Yeah, but they did a lot of really. Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. He's also who else is he? Somebody. Yeah, he's like I don't know 5 different.
He played
characters.
Brunt.
Yeah, that's right.
In Deep Space Nine, also in Wayoon.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And he was a random character
Wayoons.
on Voyager. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds like awesome. Great fun. Hope you get to do that again. I think I mentioned to you by email that one of my friends from the local entertainment scene normally goes on that cruise. She wasn't able to this year, but as a sort of entertainment coordinator or director for that. So
what was
maybe
great
later next year.
What was great is so I gave a couple of science talks, some with Dr. McDonald's. Enthusiasm for science through the roof, so amazing. Just how packed things would for our sessions. Like it'd be this big auditorium, there'd just be like tons of people there. So I also started this thing I was calling science office hours, just as a way of interacting with people outside. So I'd sit up at the cafe and I'd say, I'll be there from 8:30 to 9:30 at breakfast time, and I'll just bring my food. Anybody wants to come and chat can chat. And I thought, 1-2 people might come by. I'd show up like 30 minutes early, and there'd be like a line of people waiting.
That's awesome.
So many people so excited to talk about science.
Sounds like they need to have more scientists on there.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We're available. So that's awesome. And your book, of course, is an opportunity for people to get a really fun sort of view of learning about biology, and there's a lot to learn, and it's always fascinating to hear those explanations with a cool sort of science fiction Star Trek hook. Unfortunately, I can't hold. We're recording this on Zoom. I can't hold a copy of your book up because it's in my office, and I'm not even allowed to go to my office anymore. I wasn't thinking when I left it the last time that I'll never be here again.
You didn't grab your essential items, Josh?
Yeah.
I don't think I would have counted.
Let's see. There was one other spacey thing I wanted Jim to tell us about before we get your answers to the trivia, which was one of, it should just sort of be a standard segment of our show is Einstein's theories pass another test, because that's just kind of a regular occurrence. Frequently it's about general relativity. This one is really special relativity, or maybe even sort of pre-Einsteinian. It's about the Lorentz invariance and the constancy of the speed of light.
Yeah, so we've been testing the special theory of relativity for much longer than the general theory, and Lorentz invariance is the fancy word that basically just means it doesn't matter how fast you're going, physics should work the same, right? So in any reference frame, physics should be the same, and the speed of light should be the same. You measure the speed of light when you're moving fast or at rest, you should measure the same number. And we've tested this over and over and over again, and it passes with flying colors every time. But it can be very hard to test in kind of the high energy regime. So that is, we have lots of different wavelengths of light, and we can move them around, move the sources of light around at all kinds of different speeds and measure those speeds of light, and we always get the same thing. Lorentz invariance always seems to be a thing that works. But testing it with really, really high energy light is a challenge, because that's hard to create that kind of light. But it turns out that there are some astronomical sources of ludicrously high energy waves. So, of course, the highest energy wave wavelengths, we call those gamma rays. And it's kind of an open-ended thing. Anything more than a certain amount of energy in a photon, we call that a gamma ray.
It's in ludicrous mode.
Yeah,
That's right.
Ludicrous energies.
Put your laser in ludicrous mode, right?
Yeah. Well, the amount of energy we're talking about in a single photon is something like 100 tera electron volts, which if you're not familiar with that unit, may not mean anything. But for those who are, that's a ludicrous amount of energy in one little particle of light.
And for those who aren't familiar with it, the light that we see with our eyes is on the order of a few electron volts. So
right,
this is,
and a tera electron volt is trillion electron volts. So we're talking about 100 trillion electron volts, 100 trillion times the energy in a regular standard bit of light.
So you shouldn't look at it.
And that's one regime where, like, if we figured if relativity is going to break down, that's where it's going to break down in kind of these extreme circumstances, like with extreme amount of light. And it's been hard to test, because how do you get a photon with that much energy? Well, some of these astronomical phenomena produce that. And we've been able to, in recent times, see at least like 4 different astronomical phenomenon that were producing this kind of light. And the fact that that light is getting to us is an indication to us that the Lorentz invariance still works, even at that high energy. And the reason for that is tricky, and I don't even pretend to understand it entirely. Basically, very, very, very high energy light like that, if it travels any significant distance and Lorentz invariance is not working, then that light would break down. It would decay into particles before it got to you. So the fact that it's getting to us across cosmological distances means that Lorentz invariance is satisfied. And it's not immediately obvious why that is, just saying that, but it is.
And this is an important observation, because aren't there some predictions that say that it should break down at those very high energies in order to have a happy ending between gravity and Einstein?
Right. So some of the versions of
quantum
our,
mechanics
of our,
and gravity, I mean, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So some of the versions of our string theories and so forth to try and mash these things together would predict that this thing did break down at high energy, then it's not. So some of our, that's nice, because those theories tend to be really, really, really hard to test and disprove. And this is one way in which we can disprove some classes of those theories.
Cool.
So pretty cool. Einstein wins again. I have never seen Einstein lose yet.
That guy. Never make a bet against Einstein.
Never.
Yeah, no kidding.
No, he probably won that poker game.
That's right.
Star Trek.
All right. Well, good segue back to Star Trek, Jim, so we can get your answers to these things. So we'll just go from the top and holler out whether you think it's real or Josh BS. And of course, real means Star Trek, which is real. So, okay. First off, dysphoria syndrome.
Real.
Real from which series?
Original?
Star Trek Voyager, actually. Captain Janeway it's this 2-part episode called Workforce. Where it starts off, they're like, don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And it's this, they're really sort of poisoning people. Okay. Barclay's protomorphosis syndrome.
Real.
I'll call it fake.
Oh, Mohammed, I thought you would get this one because this one relates to evolution.
Oh, is
This
this from the
is-
episode Genesis?
Yes,
Ah.
but
Why is
so
it
you,
Barkley's name?
you redeemed yourself
He was
by
the one who started it, because he got that injection that then
yeah.
created
Yeah.
the whole thing. I didn't
Excellent.
remember that they
Well-
named it after him.
Yeah. Well, so since you know the episode and what's going on, you get points for that. Okay, Riker's chair hopping syndrome.
Fake.
Yeah.
So do you know what that's referring to?
Oh yeah.
He loves
The
to sort
Riker
of
stance.
Yep.
he loves to straddle over the chair, over the back of the chair.
It's the Riker stance.
Okay, Gorch.
Is that called
Real?
real?
Yeah. Real.
It's a Klingon pimple.
Oh, that's right. Because Worf had one, and he was really embarrassed about it. Yeah.
Yes, he had a big
I remember the pimple, I
gorge
didn't
on the
remember the
side of his nose. Zimmerman's holographic hallucinatory disease.
Call that fake.
Real?
Real.
Fake.
Oh,
from Mohammed.
Good job, Mohammed.
Good job.
Zimmerman, though, is the doctor,
Creator.
creator of the holographic doctor.
You guys
Orion
know about the fake Voyager paper, right? Because he's the corresponding author on that.
No.
No.
Oh, you should Google fake Voyager paper.
All right.
Somebody, can't imagine who, submitted to one of those predatory scientific journals a paper that basically described the episode Threshold.
Okay.
But the authors of the paper are Thomas Paris, Balana Torres,
Oh my God,
gosh.
that's amazing.
Ocampa, Catherine Janeway, and the
Sure.
corresponding author at the end is Louis Zimmerman.
Oh, that's awesome.
You
That's
just Google
amazing.
fake Voyager paper and look them up.
I'm looking at it
Okay.
right now. It's about the episode Threshold,
Exactly.
which is
Cool.
the weird one where they all turn into amphibians, right? They all turn into lizards.
Yep.
Oh gosh, that
And
would
good.
drove
I'm
me nuts.
impressed. You said amphibian. You didn't say reptiles. A lot of people say reptiles incorrectly, but you're exactly right.
Ah.
Amphibians. Good
Good
job.
for you.
Thanks.
Bonus points for Addie on that one. Yeah, in the other one that you were mentioning, Mohammed, Genesis, people de-evolved somehow into various random things.
Oh yeah, that one.
Of no,
Evolved.
yeah, they transformed into things in some previous evolutionary state.
By activating
Somehow.
their introns, they said.
That's right. The
How do introns
Thing,
relate
right?
to
Is it not?
midichlorians?
Well, introns are real, but like that, like you
Oh,
can't
that's true.
activate introns and suddenly like become your ancestors.
What is an intron?
So remember, I was talking about the different parts of the gene that then produce proteins, but then there can be gaps between them. The gaps are introns.
Cool.
Oh.
All right,
So that's a real thing.
that's an excellent bit of trivia to drop into a conversation sometime. I'm totally going to use introns. Okay,
Uh-oh.
next. Are you guys still with me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I have unstable internet syndrome. Next is
Kidding.
Orion fever.
I call that
Real.
real.
Fake.
It is fake.
Oh, what do they
darn.
call it?
There's just, I don't know. You mean like the lust for the Orion women?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I
The
thought there was a
horniness
name for it.
syndrome or something, I guess. I don't know. Morphogenic virus.
Real.
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 That's real from Deep Space Nine. Genetically engineered to attack the founders.
Yep.
Okay, just three more. Klingon augment virus.
That's real. That's from
Real?
Enterprise.
It's from Enterprise?
You're correct. What does it do, Mohammed?
It was the one that made their forehead smooth.
Right.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, is that how they like explained the original series? Okay.
Yeah. They're like,
And
that's
if you
why
look
they're so
into it,
different.
There's this super complicated invented story about when it must have occurred and how broadly it must have spread and when it must have been cured and exactly how and when to try to
that's clever.
reconcile people
Mhm.
being surprised or not surprised to see Klingons with a smooth forehead. Anyway, I loved Worf's original comment on the smooth head
We don't discuss it.
and
We just don't. discuss
yeah, they are Klingons and we don't talk about it with outsiders. So it's like, perfect, leave it alone at that. Okay, last two, Plock Tau.
Real?
Fake.
I'll go with real. I'm just guessing though.
That is the crazed state that a Vulcan gets into when
Yeah.
they're suffering Orion fever or whatever. their
Yeah.
mating
On
time.
far.
Yes, yes. And then finally, Jadzeian spots.
I mean,
she has them.
She
but
has,
it's gotta be
yeah.
fake.
But it's not a.
Yeah.
That's just she's a trill.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be Jadzia's spot. Yeah, no, that's just me making stuff up.
We all laughed at that one the first time.
Yep.
Though.
Yes.
It's so good.
Yes. Well, you all did excellently. I was keeping score, and it's 3,000 points for everybody. So,
Perfect.
Well done.
Yay.
Yeah.
Hooray.
Three-way tie.
Yeah. Congratulations, everybody. While it may have felt like being quarantined on a cruise ship, it was just another episode of Walk About the Galaxy. If you like this episode of Walk About the Galaxy, write us a review in the form of a book and get it published and have it become a New York Times bestseller. Be sure to like us on Facebook to get all our updates and check out our website at walkaboutthegalaxy.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Walk About the Galaxy, and catch up on old episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter
At walk_the_galaxy.
and ask us questions anywhere using hashtag WalkaboutTheGalaxy. Our theme music was composed by Richard Jerusik, production assistance provided by Diego Rodriguez, Jillian Gloria's marketing director. Thanks to our listeners in Research Triangle, North Carolina, and everywhere battling COVID-19. Thanks to Professor Mohamed Noor from Duke University, and be sure to check out his book, Live Long and Evolve, wherever books are sold. Thanks again, Mohamed, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Always a delight.
Always
Peace
fun.
and long life.
Awesome.
I'm Josh Caldwell.
I'm Addie Dove.
And I'm Jim Cooney.
We're the AstroQuarks signing off until the next episode of Walk About the Galaxy. Thank you very
Live long
much.
and evolve.
Yay.
Excellent. Congratulations on the book, Mohammed. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.